Isaiah 40, verse 31. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Galatians 6, verse 9. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. The journey of a Christian is a very difficult one, laced with many obstacles. And when we embark on this journey, it can become difficult to keep sight of the truth. Now, I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I know one thing's for sure. Satan will twist the facts of the situations and feed you lies in order to get you to give up. You can embark on a journey knowing that God is leading you through this and there's a purpose in it. And you'll know from the start that it's going to be difficult, it's not going to be easy. But when you do actually start going through it, when you are in the valley of the shadow of death, you start doubting. Look at all the stories in the Bible. Like, one story I've been particularly interested in for the last week has been the story of David. David had many times when he was doubting. There was a time, I don't know which part of the story it was, but he was basically being chased around by the kings, and he wrote a couple of psalms, they're praising the Lord and everything, but there's so many ways he's just doubting. And even the interesting thing is that even though he was doubting, and I think this is one thing you will realize throughout, even in the story of Job, even though they are humans and they're going through tough times and they're struggling, they're doubting, they still cast all their anxieties upon the Lord. They still cry out to God, they run to God and no one else. I think that's important for us to realize. But for whatever situation you're going through, I think it's very important to remember that you expected it to be difficult, right? There are two things I've noticed just looking at people who go through tough times, even for myself, just something as simple as going through a season where it's difficult. One thing I have realized is that there are two things that make people give up. One is that believing that they are alone. They're the only one going through their struggle and no one else. And then the second one is believing that they're not supposed to be going through it. And when you're in it, it's really, really difficult to just keep control of your emotions and not give up, right? Because the most difficult part is just convincing yourself to stay the course, because you knew it was going to be difficult. You know there's something at the end of it. You know there's something you're going to be learning in it, in the journey, right? You know there's something that God has got. He's got so many wonderful things for you, but it's going to be difficult. And it's just telling yourself to stay the course. Just stay the course, right? And the two things that stop people from staying the course is believing that they're the only one going through it and they're not supposed to be going through it. And I think it's important when you are in the situation, just to remind yourself, reframe your mind and be like, well, first of all, if I was to ask you, when you are thinking like you're the only one going through it, if I was to ask you genuinely, do you genuinely believe you're the only person that is going through this in the entire world? Or do you believe you're the only person to have gone through this and you're the only person to ever go through this? Logically, you'd instantly answer that question and say, no, of course not. I can think of many examples, even in the Bible, many examples of people going through tough times, even in the same journey as you. It might be a particularly parallel journey to you and they've gone through tough times as well, right? But when you're in there, it really feels like I'm alone. I'm the only one going through this, right? And I think I've noticed it in my life where I've kind of used this as a way of motivating myself to keep going, right? Now, one thing I've been doing, and I'm trying to stop doing it, I'm going to stop doing it, is that when I'm going through a tough time, whatever it is, I'll go online and I'll watch James Bond, sad edits, like Skyfall, right? And you see James Bond being sad and he's still going through it, he's still James Bond, right? Or I watch a Cristiano Ronaldo sad edit, right? Or Harvey Specter, or whatever it is, right? I'll watch people who I find motivating going through tough times, and it makes me feel like I'm not alone. I get to see how I see them going through a tough time, and I know that they still manage to get out of that. And for me, that motivates me. And I think it's just important to remind yourself that you're not the only person to have gone through this, and you're not going to be the only person to go through this. And while we mustn't go and look at other people for motivation to be oh, they're going through a tough time, so it's fine for me. You need to remind yourself that God is with you, right? And who better to motivate you than God himself, right? Because when God is walking you, you know damn well what he says is going to happen, it's going to happen, right? So it's important to remember you're not alone. And the second part that I spoke about is just people believing that they're not supposed to be going through this. And I kind of spoke about it briefly when I said that you knew it was going to be hard, right? Something very profound I learned on a podcast, the Modern Wisdom podcast by Chris Williamson, right? He was speaking to Alex Ramosio, or Alex Ramosio was the one who gave him who spoke about this. And the one thing that he said was that it's just something that's important to remind yourself when you're going through tough times, is that you knew this journey was going to be hard. This is what hard feels like. And all of a sudden, just reframing it like that is like, whoa, right? Because all of a sudden it's like, well, of course, right? Because like I said, the difficult part is when you believe that it's not supposed to be this hard. But when you think about it logically, it is supposed to be hard. You knew before it was going to be hard. When you embarked on the journey, you knew it was going to be difficult. Now that you're in it, just remind yourself, I knew it was going to be difficult. This is what difficult feels like. And when you remind yourself that way, it's like, oh, it's not so bad, right? It's not so bad. I expected it to be this difficult, right? So I think it's important to remember those two things. And I kind of touched on the fact that, God is with you throughout the journey, right? The one thing we also need to remember as Christians is that, God is with us, right? It's a very difficult thing to remember, and it's not very motivating a lot of the time, but I think that's just a show of our lack of faith, right? Jesus said, "O ye of little faith," and it's quite interesting why I learned when I was reading about that comment. We all know Jesus said, "Oh ye of little faith," but when I was reading I think it's the book of Matthew, it's one of the Gospels for sure, right? What happened was that the disciples were busy fighting over food, like they were worried about where food was going to come from. And okay, it's a little bit dumb to be like, okay, you're with Jesus and you're worried about where the food is going to come from. But I think the thing that was even more damning was that happened literally right after God fed the 5,000 with the bread and the fish. And it's like, Jesus literally just did this amazing miracle that people were going to be talking about forever. He's just done it in front of your eyes. There were the 5,000. And it's important to remember, it wasn't just like 5,000 people. It was 5,000 Jewish men. And then now you bring in the wives and the children, so many people, and then he fed a further 4,000 non-Jewish men, and again, think about their wives and their families as well. It's like they literally had, 2 loaves of bread or whatever it was 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, or the other way around, I don't know. It was very little food, like you couldn't feed a family, you could barely feed a family with it, and he just provided all of this for everyone. And you would think, oh, if I just saw Jesus do that, surely tomorrow when we start running out of food, we're not going to start arguing amongst ourselves. But they did. And then you realize when Jesus is like, "Oh ye of little faith," it's like, yeah, that is insane. And when you hear that story, it's like, oh, that is insane. But we do the same thing, right? How many times has God performed the miracle in our lives? And it doesn't need to be anything crazy like, oh, you got the greatest academic comeback that could be nothing but Jesus, but just simple things. I've seen this Instagram reel before where it's like, a lot of the times you don't realize that you're walking into things you prayed for before, right? Think how many things have you had right now that God has provided for you on, right? The very fact that you're here, first of all, is like God has woken you up, that alone is a miracle in itself, right? But genuinely, think about all the things you wanted last year. Just think back to just 1 year ago, the things you wanted that you have now, right? How many times God has never failed you, right? And for whatever reason we forget, and that's why Jesus says, "O ye of little faith." It's important to remember that God has never let you down, and he won't let you down going forward. And I think when we remember that the author of tomorrow has ordered our steps, I think it makes it so much easier, right? It makes it more bearable for sure, and we can definitely walk because we're not relying on our own strength, but we're relying on Jesus' strength. And when we rely on him, again, he's never failed. I think it becomes a lot easier to walk through to that breakthrough. But yeah, you guys let me know what you guys think of the topic in the comment section below. Make sure you subscribe to join the Self-Improvement Brotherhood. And until next time, I'll see you boys.